go.
Okay, great. So Bob, thank you for being with us, and we just did a quick introduction of people, some of whom seem to be new to our after party conversation. And one of the things that was commented on, which was from Brianne, who's calling in from the UAE, it was just how packed and dense and really valuable this information was. And Sandy's comment was, this is one of the best explanations of the UN she's heard. So, and Brianna's concluding comment was also, at the end you said, I was sorry for talking too much, when in fact she thought, well, no, you haven't talked enough, because there's just so much information here. So just to sort of catch you up where we are.
Okay, well, that's nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
And just to let you know, we're coming from all over the world. Bree, like Lisa said, is calling from the UAE. Dot is coming from Cape Town, South Africa. Yolanda's in Colorado. Catherine's in St. Louis. Mike is in Marina, right? Marina?
Yes, he is.
Yes, he is. And I'm in Southern California.
Hi, Mike.
It's sort of good to know the global appeal you've got here this morning on this call. Yeah.
Well, Cape Town's a wonderful place, and there's I mentioned the Green Map project during the talk, and there's going to be actually a meeting in Cape Town soon that will involve map makers from different parts of the world are going to come together and talk about how we can make this platform more accessible to more communities, so that they can refresh their understanding of the place they live in, which in many cases we've lost that sense.
Can you just tell a little bit what Green Map is, since you've referred to it a couple of times, and to give context to what you're saying?
Yeah, it's very simple. It's a simple-minded project run by Wendy Brower, who I mentioned. And it's a platform and a set of tools, map making tools. The basic premise of which is this set of iconography that has been developed that doesn't require language skill, that it kind of creates its own language. But the point of the iconography is not to have maps made for people, but to have people make their own. And the notion is a very simple one, which is that in many parts of the world, especially in the so-called developed world, that people have lost contact with the places they call home. They have their pathways to the shopping centers, and they have their pathway, but in terms of the kind of the richness of what's around them and who's doing what, and what's the difference between native and non-native plants, and where are the wildlife habitats, and where are the environmental challenges that need to be addressed, drainage and where does garbage go, and how is it treated, and what happens to just the whole kind of, where's our food grown, and what are the transport routes, and what is required that so that we can have blueberries in January, kind of thing. Like what is all that about? And I worked for a long time in a Native American community in southeastern North Carolina, Robeson County, and the kids in Robeson County, if you gave them a quiz about life in New York City, and you gave them a quiz about life in Robeson County, they would know more about life in New York City than they know about life in Robeson County, because they see it on TV, they see it in the movies, they have some, their lives are permeated with images of other places that are not their place. And it's true for much of the world. And so part of what we try to do is to get people to reinvest in their local communities. Like, who's living there now? Where do they come from? What do they do? Just there's a whole range of kind of civic, artistic, cultural, environmental resources. Most people's communities are richer than they know. And so reintroducing that is, I think, important. And that's the simple-minded task of the Green Map Project, is to get people to do that. So that's it.
Talk about reaction to response. I mean, that's really in a way what you're talking about, is people responding to a reflection of what's happening in the real world and letting the world know. And that's another really great tool for helping us shift. And also, to your point in the conversation, to like bridge this gap between policymakers and all people on the ground and people who are trying to represent their communities. It's a great way to do it.
Yeah, because if if the idea is to throw more of the responsibility for the Sustainable Development Goals onto local communities, then local communities also have the responsibility to get up to speed, right? And part of that is ensuring that whatever they do locally is inclusive of people, but also other life forms and challenges, and and that they have enough of a tapestry of the local that they can make good decisions around that, right? It's a different version of what the problem with the UN is, which is we don't really know who we're making decisions for.
Mm-hmm.
Yolanda, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, it is interesting because I am really excited about Bob's point, about your point, about how we need more brokers and mediators for information. And recently, I'm currently studying at the University of Denver, and I'm putting together a project that I came out after being during the summer in Morocco and seeing how the people that we are not looking at, that was kind of like an inspiration. The people that we are not looking at, the people that we are not paying attention to, the people that they are not in our awareness, normally they have the morals, or they have the tools for, they haven't disconnect themselves from their own families, communities, and problems that they're happening in their society.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest problem that I see right now, it is an enormous disconnect from our governments to the people, and from global problems to the people. I think that the fear to tap into the pain that is given us constantly, all the atrocities that are happening in the world, is kind of forcing us to disconnect, to not really look. It's kind of like we need to be more witness. Being an active witness is our responsibility. So in a way, all of this together, I am trying to develop a program like a podcast at the university, in order to listen to their voices, the voices that is kind of like an undercurrent, I wouldn't say underground voice, but it's a voice that I don't hear. I mean, the problems with DACA, for instance, I'm not in the side of fighting against it, and that's why I was very interested in this web seminar, because that is not the voice. I want to hear the other side. I want to hear where they're coming from. I want to know what are the reasons they have to react the way that they are reacting. I think we need more difficult conversations, that they are more into compassion, or they're more into opening the space and not being scared to face at the fear that give us these enormous atrocities that are happening in the world. As the Myanmar picture that you were talking at the very beginning, it's like we are so disconnected, so disengaged, that we need to create new environments that, in a way, foster more opening of the heart, and that has to be included in our policies, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I mean, I don't know if you did any of this work, or some of the rest of you, but I got sucked into like anti-nuclear weapons work when I was younger, and we used to do this, what now seems to be an absurd thing, which is going into these schools and, with our little charts and maps and saying to, 8th graders, well, if a bomb blows up in your community, like, half of you will be blind and the other half of you will be incinerated. And then your families will be toast and your houses will be burned down. And then the bell rings. It's like, okay, well, have a nice day. Well, no, they're not going to have a nice day. I mean, what is the point of giving people information about things they can't do anything about?
Yeah.
So the deficit is not information. The deficit is participation. That's the deficit.
Mm-hmm.
So when people look at the Sustainable Development Goals and they're like, hey, this is great. Where's my pathway? And if all of us, it's like if you see, a homeless person on the street, you might give the person $1, but in terms of solving their problem, it's like, there's no pathway for people. And so generally speaking, if you have a problem, you see a problem and you can't do anything about it, you stop looking at the problem. Why would you do any, we have a participation gap that's really extraordinary. And a lot of the participation we have involves people getting in each other's faces, which we should know when people get in our faces, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't make us want to examine stuff, right? It just makes people defensive. It pushes them away. So we've got to have a much better, more consistent strategy to get more voices in the mix, so that they're not my voice and not people who look like me. That's just not going to work. Just not going to work.
I don't know. I think people like you are important too. And I think one of the biggest amazing aspect of the millennial generation is they are profoundly intergenerational. Like they are accepting all kind of faces and ages. And I think that is remarkable.
Yeah, I think it is too, except it's not my experience at the UN. In fact, I remember this at a youth summit that the president of the General Assembly put on, and they had this speaker, this guy who was, I guess, a youth. He was like 28. I guess, I don't know. I can't imagine that's a youth. But anyway, and he basically got up in the mic and he said, quite unconsciously, he said, well, my generation is the most tolerant generation in the history of the world. We love all millennials. And and I'm just sitting there going, get the hell out of here, right? Are you like in your mama, it's like, are you serious? And some of the people some of the diplomats were like, sort of like twitching, the danger of that is, again, it's not so much whether or not they relate to me. I don't have any choice but to relate to me. Problem is, at what point does a 30-year-old take responsibility for 6-year-olds, right? That's the thing, I think.
I want to interrupt here for a minute, because I think that you're both hitting on something really relevant, but I think there's something a little bit deeper that you both touched on, which is you talk about participation. And we know that lots of people want to participate because by nature we are hardwired, neurologically shown to care for one another.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is it that's keeping us from supporting one another, and what's keeping that gap between leadership and on the ground, and what's keeping people from being able to participate? And I think there's something very relevant here, which is how we process pain.
Yeah, definitely.
So much of the world, for me, you start reading the news and your heart breaks. And we're not given the skills, the emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, social intelligence skills to process pain. Mm-hmm. And to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And this actually touches on a lot of Brene Brown's work, who talks around vulnerability and about shame. And I heard her speak yesterday about her new book. And she said something that just has continued. It actually kept me awake at night last night. And it was, pain, you cannot run from pain. It's going to show up. You cannot drink it away. You cannot
Is that true?
You cannot anything. So until I'm coming from the
get out of here, seriously?
Really? But it's a really good point, because if we psychologically bullshit it away, we still feel it in our hearts and in our body, and we shut down. Right. And I think to the deeper piece. And also to sort of Sandy's point earlier in our other part of the call, we need a new sustainability goal, which is personal awareness, personal agency, and self-awareness.
No, I think so.
Once we have those skills, and once we actually can shift our education system to focus on that, that will take care of participation and hopefully also bring about compassion and dignity and help bridge this gap. So I just wanted to throw that piece in there.
No, I think that's perfectly sensible. And and the two, I don't know if there's a caveats or not, but we are now drowning in disembodied imagery, right? Because what much of Twitter is, what all of these other Snapjack or whatever the hell that thing is, that where the things disappear in 5 seconds or whatever it is. I don't know what I could
Snapchat.
Whatever. That we're just drowning in imagery that doesn't come attached to kind of explanations of things, or kind of what's the story behind the image. And so we're reacting in a superficial way to superficial incitement, right? And I think that is a really, really serious problem. And I don't entirely know what to do with that. But I think the other issue of participation, I mean, Lisa knows I overanalogize everything, and half of my analogies are really stupid, and this probably will be too. But the system that we've set up basically requires people who want to participate to go through a toll booth with a really high toll. In other words, you've got to go through this booth in order to get through to the other side, and the toll that is being exacted is a high one. So we need to eliminate the toll. We also need to get rid of the toll booths, right? I mean, this whole notion that somebody needs to like me or embrace my sense of things in order to participate in the urgency of addressing climate change or weapons proliferation or trafficking in women and children is absurd. First of all, who the hell am I? And second of all, we already know that the existing infrastructure around these issues is insufficient. I mean, things have gotten worse on my watch, not better, in some ways. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is I need to either get another watch, it's probably true, or rethink the toll booth. Rethink that whole notion of funneling people through something and exacting a toll from them in order for them to emerge as a player in this work. There's just something wrong with that model, it seems to me.
But I wanted to ask, now we see so much activism, not just in the US, but all around the world. So you see a need for people not only want to engage, are engaging, but they also see that there's a deficit in governments. I don't think that, I think before the expectation was, particularly when you look at the SDG goals, the government would take care of it. I don't think that most people have that expectation any longer. I don't think that the majority of us are waiting, hoping, aspiring, for governments to step in. I think the average citizen understands the majority of the governments around the world are not as effective as they could be or should be, and aren't necessarily focused on meeting the needs of the majority. They're geared towards the minority, and in the U.S. in particular, the corporations, the needs of the corporations. So I think we do see a lot more engagement, and I think the green map system that you brought up, if it's something that will actually help to identify locally what's happening, what resources are available, so people can tap into those resources and feel more empowered to engage and make a difference where they are, because we can all do something, where we are. We can all make a difference, even a little change. And, you brought up like the homelessness situation and seeing someone is giving out $1, but that's not having an impact. And I just saw the second time I saw this article about a mayor, they emphasized that it was a Republican mayor, which I didn't understand the relevance other than, partisan politics. But it's that he's, and I don't even remember which city this is, but he set up a program where instead of going out and just giving food and things, they actually go around, take a van around, ask homeless individuals if they want to work for the day. They pay them $9 an hour, which is above the minimum wage. They give them, lunch at the end of the day, and individuals are able to work, make an impact on the city, cleaning up the city and doing various projects around the city, which government needs. And they're able to go and take the jobs to the people who are needed. And it's been an amazingly successful program. So, those are the kind of things, where local government is actually working, and people's needs are immediately met. I think that will make a difference.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And the advantage of local activity is that's where people learn the skills that will allow them to take on bigger chunks of the global project, right? It's like you don't go from the couch in your living room to eliminating nuclear weapons. There's stages in there that involve skill development, and I think that there are people many people who have gone through that skill development process, and many more who want to. And we have to send more invitation letters and fewer. We've already worked this out. We just want people to come along and join us on one thing or another thing, right? I mean, participation is not only about the activity; it's also about the goals and developing the plan and the process. And we're not, me, whoever. I mean, we're just not always as generous as we need to be. I mean, when I was in the parish running this church in a crack neighborhood in Harlem during the 90s, early 90s, I was basically engaged in what I would call blessing stealing, which was doing too much for people and not allowing them to do for themselves. And it's like somehow or other I missed the idea, which is not very complimentary to me, but I missed the idea that if it's good for my soul to do things for others, it's good for other people's soul to do things for others. And like how I missed that is just, it's incomprehensible, but I missed it. So and I think we all miss stuff. So that's and the things we miss and that we need to remediate are things that are most likely they're not going to be exposed in UN conference rooms. They're going to be exposed in local community centers, and so that's part of the reason why it's important to do that stuff. It's not important because we get to stick with the local and not worry about the other stuff. The point is that doing good local work prepares us to do other stuff. It makes us enabled to do other stuff. And then people like me have to get rid of the toll booths.
I just want to circle back to something Brianne said that I fully agree with, and it actually struck me as interesting when at the very beginning of your talk earlier, you had said that that the UN wasn't doing a stellar job at or was setting itself up for perhaps a not success, let's put it that way, on addressing the goals. And I never really thought of those goals as something that the UN was responsible for doing as a grassroots community builder. I always assumed it was for those of us on the ground working in the manner of collective impact, working in our particular lane, whether it's environmental or climate change, or ending homelessness, or interfaith relations, or difficult dialogues, or whatever it is that you're bringing to your community. I always felt that was up to us, and that the Sustainable Development Goals were mile markers. It was the UN's responsibility to measure the impact, but it was our responsibility. It was an all hands on deck opportunity. The Millennial Development Goals didn't pack a punch. There just wasn't there.
It was a train wreck. I agree.
Right. But something about the Sustainable Development Goals, I don't know if it's the pretty color tiles or the way that we have the internet now to get them out there. But the good news is, to Brione's point, the good news is there's a lot happening, at least from the world that I get to play in, and that is at the real grassroots level. And I'd also like to say, I think the Charter for Compassion is in a critical position. We have a sacred responsibility, and we've provided this environment. I don't know if we provided it. We are the hosts and the responsible caregivers of this environment to remind us all that it's our personal responsibility to our agency, which is held in compassion. The compassion is our God-gifted responsibility to address those goals. And it all comes down to us. And thank you so much. I also want to, I'm right on line with Brione today. What an extraordinary talk earlier today, because you really did bring it down to the personal. And how can we have global change if we don't have personal change? It wouldn't be very sustainable. So I'm so grateful for that.
And apropos to your point, I mean, it's a long story and I won't go into it because it's not relevant, I don't think. But there is we have a number of Central African projects that we raise money for them, and we we won't do that anymore because they have enough money, and that give them some sort of guidance on how to get started. But the biggest obstacle early on was just them sort of looking at me going, "Oh, we can do this. This is actually something doable. We can organize but I think for them there was this kind of dignity in the organizing project. But I was saying to Lisa yesterday, the dignity is there's a sort of porridge notion of dignity. Like some of it's too cold, some of it's too hot, some of it's just right. And the just right is relevant to context. And for them, part of doing NGO work, in community organizing in a place like Congo or Cameroon is flying in the face of government opposition to those activities, right? I mean, you're not getting a boost from the state. You are in some ways being undermined by the state, right? Your family is in danger. I mean, I'm trying to make these projects locally governed, and it's hard to find people who are willing to do that because of the risk factors. And so I'm going to go over in the winter and sort of do hands-on interviewing and try to get people to sort of talk through what their fears are and get them to see if they. But in parts of the world, this is a higher bar than it should be. Part of our privilege is that we can, part of my privilege is that I can do things in the world that are relatively controversial without repercussion, or without the repercussions that are severe in the way that the repercussions of people who are trying to do community work in Turkey now, or trying to do conflict mediation in the Central African Republic are. I mean, some of these people are really vulnerable. They're really out there, and so that this dignity and participation, all of these things have a very specific context, and if we're going to promote them, we can't promote them in an essentialist way. We have to promote them in a highly personal and contextual way, or it's just not going to take.
Right, and thank you for that. It is so complex, and it is so complicated, and it varies from person to person, and all 7 billion of us. So there are that many paths to
Yeah, there's a lot of context.
Yeah. And also, the last thing I just want to say, and I know Lisa, you want to say something. I just want to complete my thought with the before about the power of collective impact and the power of bridging. Like you mentioned, that the UN is simultaneously building and then trying to bridge silos. And how is it that we can be courageous and vulnerable enough to look outside of our silo and see, when we heal one silo, we heal ourselves. So what can we do to contribute and collaborate and be better complementers to one another rather than competitors? And that speaks right to the vulnerability and how we address pain. It all, again, comes down to addressing pain.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a pause here because I'm aware of time, and I know, Bob, you need to get going. I'm sorry, Sandy, to have cut you off.
No, that's all I wanted to say.
No, Bob, I want to be sure you can get to your plane on time and get.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay for a few more minutes, but it's up to you.
Okay, go for it then. If you're good, go for it. I just want to be sure.
No, I'll give you a couple of minutes to.
So, anything you want to say in conclusion with everyone?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's nice of you to take time out of your day to do this, and I think it's, I mean, you don't need to listen to me, but I think that the whole process of the structure and the kind of the after party idea, I think it's all really good, and I think that I think that there's good news in this. The bad news is, I think, well, maybe it's bad news, I don't know, is that we're going to have to really push hard now. I mean, there's just, there's a lot of metaphorical wolves ready to blow the house down. And I mean, Lisa knows that I had really thought seriously about leaving this job in early September and moving on to do what, God knows, I have no idea what, but do something useful. And I'm, not the most popular person at the UN by any stretch of the imagination. But we got a lot of, we're a tiny little office, and we got an awful lot of positive reinforcement for sticking with this. Because diplomats listen to us, because we don't cultivate an expertise, but we know more about what's going on in the different conference rooms and among the different issues than most people do, including the diplomats. And that there's some value in, it's like, diplomats need to be reminded every day that this is one process, not a multitude of disparate, disconnected processes. And that they really need to know that the people who are critiquing them are really paying attention to them, which is something you learn in counseling. If you're not being attentive to your client, they're going to bail on you, and rightfully so. Like attentiveness is really an undervalued skill set. As most of us know from our personal relationships, when no one's attentive to us, we know what that means. And it's just an incredibly valuable skill. And for the young people who pass through the office, which are really very diverse people and really skillful and wonderful, they learn that skill because it's not a skill that's taught to them. They mostly have been in school all their lives, not in the world, and the value of attentiveness to something other than their cell phones is something that just isn't really a part of their. And so to watch them sit and listen and discern and understand just very concretely that, for most of us, assessment is a function of expectation. And, if we expect little and get more, we assess positively. And if we get, if we expect highly and get less, we assess negatively. But we need to expect highly, including of ourselves. So that's my spiel.
It's time for
Hallelujah.
unprecedented unified creativity.
Yeah, no, I think.
And imagination, build a new world. I just want to say before we disengage. Yolanda, I would love to know more about your program at the university, because it might be a wonderful model, or it would be a wonderful model for our education sector. At the Charter for Compassion, we have University
Yes.
of Compassion that are always looking for models and programming.
Okay, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so perhaps we can connect. I'll drop my
Yes.
email here in the chat window for you.
Okay, thank you.
And I also have a former staff colleague who's at your university doing a degree in urban planning. So so she might be very interesting as well. And Lisa has my email, but feel free to email if you have questions, because that's sort of a big chunk of what we do in the role. So don't hesitate.
So I will actually, in the follow-up, where we send a recording of this conversation and the webinar, I will include all of your relevant salient details, both your Twitter account and your email,
Okay.
and we'll go from there.
And thank
Okay.
you, Lisa, for an extraordinary interview.
Oh, well, thank you for listening to it, and bless all of you in your work. We really need you to do it. So hang in there.
Right on. Safe travels.
And you too, Lisa.
Oh, safe travels, everyone. Well, safe travels, Bob. And
it was nice to meet you, Dot.
Yeah, take care of yourselves, everyone.
Bye.
And
Bye-bye, thank you.
have a nice life, Mike. See you one of these days. And
Extraordinary.
bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us from South Africa and from all over the world.
See you later. Bye.
Nice of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob.
So much for the after party. Bye.